thank you so much for the invitation to be here today to share what CASA does and to hopefully just answer any questions that anyone might have. We are very fortunate to have an active, great CASA here in the room with us that I got to meet face-to-face today, and that is Nicole. I'm just wondering if anybody else is a current CASA or has been a CASA? No? Great. Well, then we'll have lots of new information to share, and then after we leave, if there's any questions, go ahead and chat with Nicole about that. My name is Amy Martin. I am Program Director for CASA of Central Oregon. My colleague in the back is Christina Florin. She's the training coordinator for CASA of Central Oregon. So we'll kind of start at the beginning. I get a lot of people when they find out where I work, a lot of like, I've heard of CASA. My brother is a CASA. My cousin is a CASA, but I don't really know what you guys do. And so CASA is court-appointed special advocates. What we rely on is community members to step in and say, I have the time, I'm able to do the training, and I have a passion for walking alongside our most vulnerable population, children that have been taken into state custody and are currently navigating the dependency court system. When the state of Oregon decides to take custody of a child by child welfare, they go to court, they present all their information, judge decides, yes, we have enough, we're going to go ahead and take custody. What happens at that point is mom gets appointed an attorney, dad gets appointed an attorney, kiddo gets appointed an attorney. DHS is present. What, though, we tend to see happen is there can be more action going on with mom and dad because everybody's focused on change behavior for mom and dad. What can fall through the cracks most of the time is the actual child. The priority of the entire thing is the child. The child has been identified as the victim of abuse or neglect. They have met that high level of criteria that has identified that this child has been either a victim of abuse or neglect. So what CASA is able to do is come in, the judge actually appoints CASA to the case. We are a legal party to the case and says, okay, CASA, like this is your role to actually speak for the child, to present the child's wishes while all at the same time presenting the information that you're able to gather about the case that says, Your Honor, this is my recommendation. Everybody, attorneys have their own agendas, right? They are working on behalf of the client. And we have some wonderful public defenders in the Tri-County area. They are overworked and overwhelmed. And so when you have children's attorneys, even the best of them, we're lucky if they can go out and meet with their client once before the next hearing. So that is not an adequate representation of a child's needs going through this process. CASA gets to be involved and gets to work focused on that child. They meet with them every week. They're talking to teachers. They're talking to mental health therapists. They're reading all of the child welfare information. And they're taking the entire picture to say, this is our recommendation. This is what we think is in the best interest of the child. And expressing this is what the child has told us. Children are very in tune to what they want to express that they feel is in their best interest. So it's the opportunity for that voice to be heard in the courtroom that really has no other agenda other than advocating for that child. We rely on just ordinary people in the community, and by ordinary, I'm certainly not diminishing anybody's spectacular qualities they have. But an advocate for CASA can be anybody. Anybody that's interested in walking alongside a child through that very traumatic time in their life can get some information about signing up to be a CASA. Christina puts on a fabulous training that get you prepared to be a CASA. It's a 40-hour training, but it's broken up. There's sometimes you can do them remotely. There's some in-person ones. Sometimes they're in the afternoon. So she really tries to accommodate anybody's schedule that might be interested. You get assigned a case based on, you get sent a couple of different case scenarios, and you say, yeah, this one speaks to me. This one I can do. I can take one child. I can take this whole sibling set. I can, so there is a lot of opportunity for the CASA to determine what is best for them, what actually meets their needs. Geographically, content. Maybe there's somebody that has had experience in their own life with a lot of, folks with substance abuse disorders, that they have that knowledge and that experience of working with folks that are struggling with that, mental health issues, all of those kind of things. So it matters none what your background is. Everybody has something to offer to a child that's going through the foster care system. One of the things that I like to point out to people is when a child gets removed from the custody of their parents or their caregivers because abuse or neglect has been identified. Typically through the life of a case, that child is going to have at least 4 to 7 different child welfare caseworkers. They are going to have possibly a switch in legal assignment. An attorney might have to sign out, sign in. It is a total flux for them. Everything is changing, and it's changing very quickly, and they don't always feel like they have involvement in what's happening to them. Things are happening to them, and they don't feel like they have the voice to say, this is affecting me in this ways. CASA advocates are the one person that gets assigned at the beginning of a case and that hopefully makes that commitment to stay with that case until that child is either reunified with their parents, adoption happens, guardianship happens. So when that child is into a more permanent plan, that's when the CASA role, that's when that ends. Hopefully you come back around and you take another case. But we do rely on community members. That is what makes our entire program run. We have a full-time staff that helps to facilitate, though, all the pieces of it. A court system is complex. I don't know how many attorneys, judges, anybody else that's been engaged in that in the room. But the court system is complex. The language they use is complex. The words that they're speaking are complex. If anyone has been part of a hearing or a trial, that is, even for the most educated folks, it is confusing. You have no understanding of kind of what's going on. What CASA is there to do is to say, okay, here's what's happening. Let me translate to you what's happening. Let me prepare you for what's about to happen next. This next hearing, we're going to talk about this, right? So it's that stability factor that really allows a strong foundation for not just the child themselves, but the child's opinion and the opinion of CASA, a well-trained CASA advocate that can say, yeah, hey, I just spent the night at the resource parent home, which used to be called a foster parent, where DHS likes to confuse things and change language all the time. So now they're resource parents. But they spend time with the resource parent. They've had a conversation with mom. They've had a conversation with dad. So when they go to court, let's say I'm just going to give you an example. This happened to me recently, that DHS comes in and says, Dad's doing great. Like, Dad's doing great. DHS is saying, we need to do a return to home plan with Dad. He's doing great. And then CASA stands up and says, well, the information I was able to gather through a conversation with Dad is that he relapsed last week and he's really active in his substance use right now, right? That's no fault of DHS. DHS is, again, completely overwhelmed. They are going on the most recent information that they've been able to gather at the time that they're there to represent. CASA has that smaller, one-case, child-focused lens that can say, that's not the most accurate or up-to-date information. Let me tell you what the information I learned is. CASA was started by a judge back in the 70s in Seattle because that judge was able to see that strong gap for kids that were entering into the foster care system. Judges love CASA advocates because judges know they are the one person in that courtroom that is really there to advocate on behalf of the child. So judges take what CASA advocates say very, very seriously. The advocates submitting court reports prior to hearings to inform the court of what has happened or what has transpired in the case since the last time that they were in court, so that when judges are reading all the documentation that has come into them, they're able to read this information and can, okay, this information is coming from CASA, so they're able to make better informed decisions on the permanent plan for children. CASA directly affects that. I was a caseworker for many years in the CPS team of child welfare, which is the Child Protective Services unit, prior to becoming a supervisor. I cannot stress enough the impact that CASA's had on cases that I was involved with. They were literally, they were an extension of the work I was trying to do. So I was trying to, kind of set up resources, things for kids. They were literally the person I could go to and say, do you think this is a good idea for this kiddo? Should we get them involved in this? And they would be the ones like, not only do I think they should get involved, I'm going to go ahead and do the registration. I'll go ahead and get all this information in for you. It significantly helps. It expands the opportunities that children in foster care can be exposed to. Without somebody there really advocating on their best interest, there is a lot of cracks in the system that kids can fall through. And so it's one reason, I know Rachel's supposed to give me a hand signal if I go on talking too long, because I am passionate about the organization. It was the only job I could ever foresee myself leaving child welfare for, because I was also passionate about child welfare. But it is such an excellent opportunity of overlap to still make that commitment to serve these kids, to protect these kids, while also, staying part of that system and trying to make positive change. Systems change slowly, but as Linda pointed out as we were discussing her position on the Neighbor Impact Board and emergency shelters, sometimes you drop that seed for change and you never know how many years it's going to take. But so CASA is that voice. We have information sessions coming up for anybody that might be considering, just like, hey, I wonder if I could do that, or I'm going to ask my husband if he wants to do that, or my next door neighbor might be interested in that. We have information systems that really go through exactly what the criteria is. And there is strict criteria. By strict, I mean that very kind of flexible. There is specific criteria because there needs to be continuity in the system and continuity in the process, and that's to protect the kids that we serve. So, and there's a lot of training information that people are taught, and we have program coordinators that oversee groups of advocates, so that there's always somebody there to bring your questions to say, I am not understanding this, I need extra support here. And so our whole role as staff at CASA is really only to support the advocates that are doing the work. Everybody that is employed with CASA is there to figure out how can we better serve the advocates that are doing the work. That includes recruiting, training, supporting, all of those kind of things. Anything that I missed that anyone's kind of curious about? Yeah.
How long have you been here in Central Oregon?
I've been in Central Oregon just under 20 years.
Well,
So
I wish I'd known about it a long time ago.
Yeah.
Would
Yeah.
help with the situation that I went through with family members and stuff, and it would have been worked out so much better.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you know anyone kind of going through the same thing, I mean, pass this on. Yeah, that would be excellent. Yes, Ann.
So I went through CASA training in Portland, and I decided not to actually take a kid.
Sure.
When I learned that, at least at that point, you can't do things individually with the child outside of the foster parent's gaze. So you have to go into the home and be there with them Is that still the case?
So there is a component of truth to that. Yes, you have to go visit the child in the resource parent home or in the resource parent environment. And Christina always step in and correct me. She's the trainer and I'm just the whatever. So yes, you need to be involved with the child in that resource home because there's a lot learned in that resource home. So there's a lot of information gathered. But our CASA advocates, there is an approval for a driving policy if you wish to drive somebody. There's a process that we have to go through there just to make sure that the background check on driving is clear. A lot of them meet kids, Dutch brothers, take them out to eat lunch at McDonald's, meet them, especially in this kind of weather, meet them at the park. All of your work with the children actually should not be supervised by the other adults that are involved in this situation, especially in a resource home. Foster kids are pretty adept at making their communication when you are visiting them in the eyes and ears of other folks that are involved to make sure that that they are communicating in a way that is going to protect that, right? Most foster children are placed at least 3 times during the life of a case. So that means they're going from, resource home to resource home to resource home. When they get someplace they want to stay, and you're in there talking to them in that resource home, and it could be a multitude of reasons they want to stay. Maybe not all which we would consider healthy or safe. They are going to tailor what they say to you based on the fact that they know that that resource parent in that home is listening. That information is being shared. So that does happen because that's an important piece of investigating and analyzing the whole situation. But no, I would never recommend that you only speak to, of course, children that are of age to actually kind of communicate and do things like that. Only in the presence of a resource home. You're not going to get accurate information. So you can go to schools and talk to them. You can meet them in the community. You can go spend all day at the swimming pool. Yeah, I mean, so there's different situations. We try to be really child-focused and child-minded. So if there's something that is going to benefit the child, we try to accommodate that within the restrictions of things that we have to follow. Yeah.
How much time does this involve?
What do you think, Christina? What's your stock answer?
We say an average of 10 to 15 hours a month. And that, especially when you first become an advocate and you're getting used to, acclimated to the case, reading notes, things like that. And then going forward, so I myself have been an advocate for 4 years and been on staff for just over a year. So I've seen it for me in my casework. It kind of ebbs and flows as you get into the case. Sometimes things can blow up a bit, and so you might have some extra work to do, or if I have a court hearing coming up, I've got a little bit more going on as I prep and write that court report. But we say that average to 10 to 15, especially getting started, and then it just kind of ebbs and flows as you get into the case, but just knowing there could be months that's a little higher, a little bit lower. Continuing education is incorporated into that same time each month as well.
So it is a commitment. And we do ask people that are going to embrace the opportunity, really make sure that your life right now can accommodate that commitment, because what is not helpful is to have an advocate step in and then just be like, hey, this isn't for me, this is too much time. Of course, there's other things that happen. Moves happen, illness happens, family issues happen, and those are unavoidable and not planned. But for those folks that have gone through training and are a little bit on the fence, we always recommend, take a minute, decide if it's really going to work for you, ask more questions if you need to. Do all of that. It's not something that should be rushed into without sort of that in the back of your head. Even if you only take one case, which lots of advocates do, that you would, based on the information that you have at that time of making that decision, it is that you could be able to follow that case through. Now sometimes cases go on for 4 years, 5 years, and that's understandable. No one can make that kind of commitment at the beginning. But a child is in foster care typically in Central Oregon for a time frame of 2 years. That is sort of diminishing with the state's really strong recommendation for reunifications happening a little bit sooner. So, but there's the child welfare system. We could talk all week, and we would still have questions and not necessarily understand everything. But they do the best they can with the resources that they have, within the legal requirements that they have to work, and the criteria that they have to use to meet those. So it's a complex system. Yeah.
What about a child that's really troubled and you just can't handle it?
Mm-hmm.
Does that happen a lot?
A lot. I mean, every child that's in our system is affected by trauma.
I can imagine.
Just child welfare showing up here at your door is trauma. Every little part of the process is trauma. And so, yeah, we do have some kids that have significant behavior issues. What typically can happen in those kind of situations is we learn to work with them. As an advocate gets to know a child, you kind of know, like, oh, it's best if I meet this kiddo after occupational therapy, right? The occupational therapist says that we can come into the office and we can meet there. Or this kiddo does really, really well in the resource home. I'm going to go meet them in the resource home, but I'm going to ask maybe those resource parents, can I have a little bit of time alone? Can you step outside, do some gardening work? Can you do what have you? So again, we will try to work with you to come up with a plan that works. But yeah, I mean, children that are affected by trauma behave in all sorts of different ways. And again, as Christina was talking about the ebbs and flows of the client work or the advocate work that's needed, there's ebbs and flows of the kids. Kids get really high hopes. Oh my gosh, there's going to be a permanency hearing. I'm probably going to get returned to mom and dad because mom and dad have been telling everybody you're coming back home. And you go to the hearing and there's not a chance at that time. So you're dealing with those kiddos, which is why it's so important to have that one person that they know is going to give them the accurate information. Not necessarily the information they want to hear. There's a difference. But the accurate information so that they can kind of set their expectations and understand. Nobody likes to go through complex situations not understanding what's happening next. Yeah.
This information that the advocate collects between hearings, say for a month or two, they make notes or whatever, put it in their laptop. What then do they do with that information? To pass it back to the judge, or what's the system?
Yeah, so that information is collected and it is part of the legal record, right? Because CASA is a legal party to the case. Prior to your next hearing, we have a template that you use, and it's a court report. I don't know how much Nicole loves court reports. As a caseworker, they're not always the top thing that you look forward to, but they are the most accurate way of getting the information that's going on in the case currently. You don't have to go back to the start. You're not going back to the start and talking about why the child was removed from the home in the first place. But you are sort of making sure that you're giving current information while pulling in cases that you've already addressed, right? But that court report is what goes to the judge. That's why judges are very particular on their timelines. And that's why program coordinators can be a little annoying to advocates, because we have to be able to receive those court reports, that they get submitted directly to the court so that the judge has the time to read everything prior to showing up in the hearing. You will see a very, very angry judge. Not necessarily by CASA because they love them, but if you're an ODHS caseworker and you did not get your report in on time, it is not pleasant. So, yeah.
How much, if any, contact time do the children have with their parents?
So that is case dependent. So there is an obligation for ODHS to establish visitation, the least restrictive visitation that they can, while still engaging a relationship with a parent. That means different things for different folks. When a child is taken into custody, there is a legal requirement that those parents have to be offered a visit within the first 24 hours. Those are supervised. As more of the case is learned and going on, visitation is worked around that. Visitation can look like visitation occurring in the DHS office, supervised. They have a monitoring room that they can supervise. I also know that I worked on quite a few cases where the advocates would come during that visitation time, because it was an excellent way to be able to talk to the parents. Parents sometimes aren't as responsive as you wish they would be. And so if you can go to the DHS office, because you know that they're going to be visiting on Wednesday from 1 to 2, and you get there at 1:45 and you can talk to the parents when their visit is over, excellent opportunity. Also for the kiddos, excellent opportunity to connect with kids if that's challenging. But visitation is all case dependent.
What is the average age for kids?
In foster care? I don't know that we have that. I know that it goes from being in the NICU all the way up to kids, transitioning out. There's a program now that covers kids that were in foster care post age 18. Because we have not been successful about that historically. So.
What would determine in the neonatal, the NICU, that they would be in this program? I mean, is it predetermined that the parents who had the child can't take care of the child, or there's some red flag about the situation?
Sure. The biggest red flag in babies that are born in the NICU is that they are born substance addicted. So they have tested positive at birth for substances, as well as mother tested positive at birth. So in the NICU, you see a lot of very, very medically fragile children. Withdrawals, watching a newborn infant withdraw from opioids or amphetamines is a very, very sad, unpleasant thing to do. But that is why. There is no faith that that baby could go home and be well cared for on a parent that has been using substances throughout pregnancy.
Who in this whole scheme of things goes into the home initially and makes the assessment?
So that is like the team that I worked on and that I supervised. It's called CPS, which stands for Child Protective Services. Those are that is the branch of child welfare that receives those initial reports that come in from folks that have called in an allegation of abuse or neglect. And so they take that report that comes in and they have a very strict timeline that they need to get out. And it's called an assessment. They start the assessment in the home. And basically, it's an investigation that goes on, gathering of information to understand if abuse or neglect occurred.
All right, we're out of time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.